Hello, and welcome to CDA TV. This is Real Lives Live, and we've got another guest today. And I've known her personally for a long time, and she's just brilliant, and I love listening to her stories. And so she's going to be talking about her transgender journey, and it's been absolutely incredible. And hopefully it should be really empowering for anybody watching. And she will soon be releasing a book, which I can't wait to read. So we'll get on with it now because we only have 1.5 hours, but we've also got the opportunity at the end for you to call in with any questions or anything you'd like to say to Samantha. So you can click on the link in the comments and you can join by Zoom. But now I'd like to introduce you to Samantha Pearsall. So hello, Samantha. Hello. Oh, well, thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it. Me too. Thank you so much for inviting me. Oh, well, I'm very excited. Oh, we could just have a chat. I mean, it's been fabulous, especially meeting other people from the LGBT plus community. So tell us a bit about yourself. So I was born as Richard, but I had a nickname which was Dick. So obviously my sign name at that time probably wasn't appropriate. That was this. But after a while, I changed to Samantha. So obviously this is my sign name now. So Samantha, how did you get that sign name? Well, it was from Manchester. I had a group of friends, and we went out to Cambridge, and we were just out drinking and enjoying ourselves. We were at the bar, and we were trying to figure out what was going on, but we were really, we were partying, and it was such a good scene, but I couldn't quite hear what was being said, and I couldn't understand what the bartender was saying, and so I kept flicking my hair out the way to hear, so that sort of became my sign name. Oh, brilliant. That's like mine. This is Daryl. But thank you. That was just brilliant. So obviously we've got a few photos to share today as well. So we'll have a look at the first photo. Here it is. Do you remember that time? How old were you then? I think I was about 8. Yeah, 8 or 9. But obviously at that time was when I was a boy. And I had a really good memory of that time when that photo was taken. But yeah, I was 8 or 9 and I was a happy little boy at that stage. Yeah, I was going to say, you look really happy. And of course, you had that little spike of your hair. So was that your sign name at that time? Yeah, that was my rude sign name, obviously, because my name was shortened to Dick. So that was my sign name. It was given to me at school by the other people. And obviously I never liked it and it never felt appropriate. And obviously now Samantha is much better to sign like this. Oh, I can understand why, absolutely. So do you think at that time, inside, did you know that you didn't feel like a boy? Or I think at that time I felt different, definitely. But at that time the photo was taken, I was happy as a boy, but I had 2 older brothers as well, and I was quite younger. My brothers were quite tough and masculine, and I just didn't feel like them at all. I felt more vulnerable and just completely different, really. And I was very, very close to my mum, and my brothers were sort of out doing wrestling and football, and I just thought, oh no, I can't cope with that. And I was much more interested in women's things, and so I just sort of knew I was different. And it was when my parents took us to Toys R Us as well when I was young. We could go around and choose the toys, whatever we wanted. And I was completely obsessed with the model dolls, like Barbies, and I just said I really want that. It was absolutely amazing to me. And obviously my 2 brothers both went to G.I. Joe, like the action men, and my 2 brothers looked at me so strangely at what I'd chosen. And I remember sort of saying, oh, that's not really suitable, that's for girls, that's a girl's toy. But I was so stubborn, and I sat on the floor and I wouldn't move, and I sort of threw a tantrum, and my dad wasn't really sure what to do, and I was so determined that I really wanted that toy. So, that's one of the examples that I just knew I was a bit different. And obviously I was Richard at that time. So yeah, luckily I got the toy and I got to take it home. And were you really happy with that then when you went home? Yes, I was really, really happy, but I wasn't allowed to take it to school at that time. And my dad was really, really worried about that. And he didn't want me bullied because of it. And he said, okay, well, you can have the toy and you can take it home, but you're not allowed to take it to school because people might bully you. And I was really, really upset, and I felt really emotional about that. And I thought, oh, my 2 brothers can take their toys to school. Why can't I? And again, it was just another example of me being different. But I didn't really understand at that time because I was still really young. But obviously looking back, they were just trying to protect me. Yeah, obviously now I think it's easy, you can kind of recognise those differences. But yeah. I think once or twice I sort of hid it in my bag and took it to school with me, but yeah, I was really proud of that. I felt like I'd won, really. Oh, so at that time, was that when you sort of started to feel a bit confused, or did you already have that feeling? No, I think it started before then, when I was about 6. And it was when I was by myself in the bathroom. Was really the only place that I could kind of escape by myself without my family judging me. And so when I got out, and you could wrap your towel around your chest, and obviously men usually wrap it around their waist, but ever since I was very, very little, I've always wrapped it around my chest, and I had my towel wrapped around my head as well. So, it was even sort of strange at that time. It felt like a woman when I was in the bathroom. And so, I still sort of wrapped the towel around my chest, and other people might think that was weird, and they thought I was maybe body conscious at that time. But yeah. So do you feel like your parents recognised that earlier, maybe at the same time you did, or did that come later? Well, my mum said to me, when I was younger, sort of would ask me if I was gay, I think when I was about 14 or 15, and I became really angry, but they'd never asked me before that. So it was when I was about 14 or 15, and they were very supportive, and they said, please tell me if you are gay. And I said, no, I'm not gay. And I became quite defensive about that, really. Oh, wow. So obviously some children, when they're at school age, one of the big differences, obviously, they might split the boys and the girls for sports, and the girls' changing rooms and the boys' changing rooms. So how did you feel about that? I remember when I was in the boys' changing rooms, it felt a bit like scary, really. It felt like I was sort of forced to change in front of all the boys, and I just hated it. So I went to hide in the corner and did it very privately to get changed, and I was always one of the very first out of the changing rooms because I really didn't like it. Wow, that must have been quite emotional for you. Yeah, definitely it was. So from now, if you're looking back and comparing it to now, how do you feel that confusion has, been resolved, really? Well, I think really from when I was sort of between 6 and 8, I didn't really understand what transgender was. I didn't have any understanding of that. Nobody had taught me that, you can change gender. I just thought I'm always going to struggle. I knew I was different, but I didn't know what was going on. I just really struggled with that. So I thought maybe, that parents might see that I'm struggling, and they referred me to the Mermaid charity, which is a lot of support for parents who have children who are transgender. So it's been set up for a while now. Oh wow, so did your parents know that was there? No, I think they didn't know anything at that time, but obviously now I wish that they had known about it back then, so that they'd have support much earlier on. Oh wow, so that's quite a big difference, obviously not having that support back then. But we see a lot nowadays on social media where from very early ages that parents are quite supportive of children wanting to be the different gender from when they were born, so allowing them that change. And so I feel like it is slowly getting through to society. Do you feel the same? Yeah, I mean, definitely. When parents are there for their children and letting them express themselves and not leaving them to deal with it, and giving them those options, rather than saying, you can't do this, you can't do that, or I think you should do that, you're already telling them that their ideas are wrong. So it means that they're less likely to share that with you. They're never going to become their true self and move on from that mental health. It's very difficult if you're not going to deal with it, and that can be passed on really easily. So it's interesting to see, but just to leave them to whatever they feel suits them. And it's interesting, isn't it, because sometimes you'll see some parents and sort of say maybe they're defensive about it and they're thinking, oh, yeah, my son's tough, and maybe they don't realise the impact that that's having on their son. Is that right? Can we show them the next photo? So what's going on there? So that picture was when I had my hair transplant, and I was ill mentally, and so I was in Manchester in the centre, and it was the company called Farjo, and that's based in Manchester, and they do hair transplants. And I just remember at that time my hair had started to recede, and it massively affected my mental health. I just didn't feel happy. I was really, really struggling. And back at that time, I had to get through that. But, I wanted really beautiful hair. And my mum always said, one day you will have long hair, one day you'll get there. And I just couldn't imagine how. It felt completely impossible, like I'd never get my hair back. And so when I arrived at Farjo, it was brilliant because they sort of found me a hair transplant, and I booked it, and I didn't care about the price or anything. I had to go for it. And really that was life-changing. It really helped my mental health as well. So how did they do that transplant at that time? So they gave you, I don't know whether it was like a sedative or something, but it makes you sort of drowsy for 12 hours. And they take off all of your hair and they shave it all at the back, round here. And they have a sort of strip that they put off, and then you get a lot of nurses who very, very, very carefully take pieces off and sew the pieces in. And so I had to sit and watch a film in front of me, and so that sort of distracted me because it's quite a long film, so I could watch that all the way through, and the nurses were in the back like attaching the hair to my head, and I was watching the film, so I didn't feel a thing. So that was for 12 hours that took. Yeah. Wow. Amazing. And so yeah, at 7:30 at night it was finished. So after that, did it feel much better? Yes, I mean, it was a bit sore, but it was bearable, definitely. And am I right, at that time, that was the first process for you through the transgender stage, is that right? Oh no, that was the second. Okay, so what was the first then? So I had my genitals obviously removed and changed. So that was my first operation, my first surgery. Okay, so can we just go back a little bit then? So obviously we're talking about that first stage of removing your male genitalia. Did you feel really nervous about that? I mean, what was going through your head at that time? So do you remember it clearly on that day? Oh yes, I remember it so clearly. I mean, perfectly clear. So were you excited or? So yeah, I was travelling to Hammersmith and arrived at King's Cross. So I had to arrive the night before. And I had my ex-partner with me and with my mum. So we went down to London, and we were in the Hammersmith area. And we had to sort of go and check in with the nurses, and the nurse sort of said I'm not allowed to eat for 12 hours beforehand, I think it was. And I think it's like fasting before an operation, so I couldn't eat for a certain amount of time before that. But I was so determined, I wanted food, I was starving. Oh, so did you go to McDonald's, right? But they said, you know, if you eat, you can't have surgery tomorrow. And I was just completely dreaming of pizza. It was across the road. You know, it was like, felt like it was waving at me. I really wanted the pizza, and the nurse said, okay, well, you can have one slice of pizza, that's it. And so finally I went and I got my one slice of pizza, and after eating it, we went to bed. And my partner and mum went off and left me in the hospital on the ward. And there were 3 beds, and then 3 beds opposite as well, so 6 in total. Were they all the same, all going through the same surgery? Yes. I mean, we all had this, we were all in the same ward, which was the Marjorie ward, so there were 6 of us in total. And it felt really, really strange because I kept looking at what the time was. And I knew it was sort of coming closer, and I was the first person in the morning to go and I was hoping for the interpreter to arrive as well. And I was hoping that my partner would arrive at that time, and my mum hadn't arrived, my partner hadn't arrived, and time was ticking. And the nurse was sort of telling me, the surgery's today, you know, we need to get going. And I kept sort of thinking about excuses, like maybe I need to go to the toilet. And she said, oh no, you know, you need to have the operation. And I said, no, I need to see my partner, I need to see my mum before going. And then, of course, what happened? Oh, because I was really worried that, you know, I might never wake up after or during the surgery. I might never wake up. So you never know what's going to happen. So I just really, really, really wanted to see my mum so that I could say goodbye when I went into the surgery. So luckily she came in time and said goodbye as I went to sleep.
So then after that, you had your first surgery, and then you went on to your second surgery, which was the hair transplant. What else have you had done? I've had breast augmentation, and then I had my teeth done, and then I had lip filler and Botox in my bottom as well. Oh my goodness, you had so much done to you. Wow. So you had the hair transplant. How old were you at that time? I'm trying to think. It was such a long time ago. Thinking that was in 2006, I think, about 2006. Yeah, so quite a while ago. I think we've got a photo of that, haven't we? A 10-year difference. If we can have a look at those photos and compare them from the beginning of the transition to afterwards. There we go. So that was at the age of 16 on the left, in 2016, and then all done at the end. My goodness, what a difference. Can you take me back to how your mind was at that time? Can you remember? Well, at that time I was still a boy. I was just starting the transition phase and just felt not happy with myself. I was feeling depressed. Really, because I was struggling with my identity. And at that time, I had come out to my parents, and I remember telling them I'm not gay, but actually I'm transgender, and the shock, they just weren't expecting it. I think they were expecting me to come out rather than to be transgender. And because I've got an older brother who is gay, my worry was to have, I had my elder brother who was gay, and then he's called Philip, and then Matthew is hearing, he's straight, and then I'm the littlest. To have a deaf transgender child as well, you know, what a difference in the family. And I didn't think that it would be like that, you know, to have gay, straight, trans, all in the 3 children. But at that time, you know, the education was so poor, my education was so poor. I'm so grateful for the support that I got. Well, I personally met your parents. I remember it's about 4 years ago, And I was so shocked at how beautiful they were and jealous at how beautifully they signed with you all. And it's natural, of course, for parents to want the best for their children, so I guess it was a worrying time for them. I think my mum felt the emotions more than my dad did. My dad, he's quite laid back as a person, and I think although he did find it difficult with my transition, my mum was worse emotionally. I think she had to go through a grieving process because there was no support from my parents at that time. And that's so important to get that, isn't it? Yeah, there's no support for parents out there who are dealing with their child coming out and being transgender. So I kind of feel like it's difficult to it's difficult to get the support from people because a lot of people feel rejected by their parents. And my mum didn't do that to me. She was just going through the grieving process because I was going from Richard to Samantha, and she had to grieve for Richard because he had then gone. And that was an emotional time for her. Oh my gosh, I'm getting goose pimples. Yeah, that was really hard for my mum. At that time I didn't understand. I was like, oh come on mum, you can get over it. This is who I am, move on, get over it. But my mum was explaining to me that it is a grieving process and I'm struggling to understand because I'm going through the change as much as you are. I'm having to transition with my emotions of who you are and your identity as much as you are. And when I look back, I can understand that. Maybe I was a little bit hard on them. But if I empathise with them a bit more, I can understand the grieving process because there was no support for them, absolutely nothing. And that's vital, isn't it? And if anybody else here is going through a change, to involve the parents and to get support for them as well. I never thought about that myself. So if I was to have a son who was to pass away and then have a girl in their place, that's kind of what it's like. Yes, it is. And for a brief time they couldn't deal with watching Richard change to be Samantha, saying goodbye to Richard. Oh, I was just getting on with my day-to-day work. Mum had to go to work, she had to just get on with everything, and it affected my mum because she's a performer. But yeah, she had to become more open about my son is Samantha now, even though it was a really hard time. They had counselling, thankfully, and I invited them in as part of my counselling. Their work gave them counselling, and that's a real tip that I will give to anybody out there, is if your child is going through the transition, the best way of coping with it is to see your child as a twin. Oh, okay, that's a really good tip. Yeah. So now Mum sees Richard and Samantha as twins. And then after that she felt a lot better about it. Oh, that's such a nice way of looking at it. I know my mum, she'll always shout, Daryl, dinner's ready. And I can imagine for your mum that was quite difficult to learn to change your name from Richard to Samantha. Well, it's kind of my fault because it's naturally part of my personality to be mischievous. Always. Oh, why am I not surprised about that at all? I am a little bit mischievous and I like to wind up my mum. Because I have such a beautiful relationship with her, we're able to wind each other up. And she'd always go to say Richard and then go, oh, I mean Samantha. And it took her quite a while to get used to that. So at the end, she just got used to saying it. I'm not supposed to say it live, but Samantha is the sign name that she has given me. Oh, the password on the computer is now Samantha to help her to remember it. Oh my gosh, you've given me so many tips so far. And my dad as well, yeah. He finds that if he's typing Samantha again and again on the computer, it kind of just rolls off the tongue easier. What made you pick the name Samantha? What was your reason for that? Well, as I was going through the transition from stopping being Richard, I said to my parents, if I had been born a girl, what would my name have been? And my mum said it would definitely be Samantha Jane. I was like, okay, well that's what my name should be then, Samantha Jane. And so that's how I've changed my name through the deed poll. It's now Samantha Jane, because I feel like that's who I should have been born as. And also that helps me to bond with my parents, to ask them what name they would have chosen rather than coming up with a name for myself, because that would have been quite difficult for them to kind of empathise with, to understand. I felt that it was the nicest thing to do. Yeah, I agree. And it's interesting thinking about other transgender people, how they have come up with a name. Do you know? Oh, that's a really good question to ask, actually, and I would recommend that to anybody who's going through the transition, to ask your parents what your name would have been. I think that's really sweet to ask, what would you have called me if I were a girl? And your parents must feel proud that they've got to name you anyway. Let's have a look at the next photo, shall we? That was my 30th birthday. Oh, I remember I was there. That was such a good time. So you've got your mum and your dad there. Oh, that's such a beautiful photo. I remember it so clearly. It really wasn't that long ago. It was only 3-4 years ago. Well, next week will be my birthday on the 26th. Oh my goodness, I can't believe it was that long ago. Time goes by so fast, doesn't it? And you were fully transgender then? You were official, or had you not quite finished? Oh gosh, I can't remember. I'm trying to think. That's a really good question. I never thought about it. I just kind of got on with those aspects of my life. I think 2014 was when I had the genital change, and that was when I had the cosmetic surgery. That was when I kind of felt like I'd made the full change, which was about 2 years ago. So the whole change altogether is a 10-year process, isn't it? Gosh, what a journey you've been on. It's a long journey, and it's also not a cheap journey. It's been ever so expensive. So yes, it is difficult, and you have to get the money to pay for the surgery. You know, it's not free on the NHS. The genital reassignment surgery was on the NHS, but that was the only part of it that was free. That was it. So my breasts, my hair, my teeth, my bottom, everything else had to be paid for, what they call the cosmetic surgery. Yeah, I guess it's what, not an essential surgery. I'm trying to remember when I've met somebody else who was going through the transition, through the transgender change, and they were going through the NHS, but they had to go through, I'm thinking, about 5 years of counselling first before they could get started on the process of the operational procedures. Do you advise that, to have counselling first? Yes, I would recommend that, absolutely, to have counselling. I didn't have counselling personally, and I think the reason for that was when you go for your first appointment, I went to London, Brighton, Manchester, all different places, and it was London that I finally chose. And the questions were things like, have you experienced abuse? Are you a drug user? And I think that was kind of, instead of me going to counselling, I think they looked at that and thought, actually, you don't need to go for counselling, because I was quite a straightforward case, I guess. I think looking back though, I would benefit from counselling, but there just wasn't the opportunity. It's been such a struggle through this whole journey. And if I look back, if I could change one thing, it would be to have had counselling. But they didn't provide it. I guess they didn't even think to ask, did they? No, they didn't. They didn't. They just thought, you're going to be a straightforward case. There's no issues on the tick boxes that I've got here, so let's go ahead with the procedures. And I met a few doctors every 3 months or so to get blood tests and checks, and then they sent me off for the procedure. There were questions that went with it, like why are you transitioning? And I had 2 psychiatrists as well assess my mental health. But yeah, they deemed me as okay, so off I went for the surgery. If we're generally talking about people who, just anybody, I would always advise counselling. And do you think you'd have to go through the GP, or is it something you had to do privately? Well, for a deaf person in the deaf community, there are barriers to communication already, and to counselling as well. There's Sign Health, or Deaf for Deaf, but through the CCG, the Care Commissioning Group, you can actually, you have to appeal because they have no idea what it is, what deaf counselling is. But there are the services out there, but it's something that you have to really fight for, because most GPs are hearing, all GPs are hearing as far as I'm aware, and so you have to, they think you just need an interpreter with you as you do for a doctor's appointment. So it's not the same, because you get passed from pillar to post and have that 3-way conversation. Okay, so if you were to train GPs on how to empathise with a transgender person who was deaf, is there anything out there? Is there any training for anybody who's deaf on how to cope with transgender and the transition? No, there isn't. There's nothing out there, and I think that for deaf people to have that empathy and that full understanding. There are deaf counsellors out there, yes, but there's none who can really understand my journey. They can't sort of take a walk in my shoes and see what I've been through. Well, goodness. Well, hopefully we'll have a few people out there who will be able to be transgender and train as a counsellor. That would be fantastic. Let's have a look at another photo. Who's this? That's me. Was that just at the start of your process? I moved to Manchester in 2008, and at that time I felt like I was becoming myself. I felt like I didn't have to answer to my family of who it is that I am. Oh, I totally get that. When you get out to university, you're like, oh, forget the family, I'm free now. I totally get that. And in the northeast of England, in Middlesbrough, where I'm from, that area is quite a rough area, and it's quite a place of poverty to live. And there was very little LGBT education at that time. And so I felt that if I continued to live there, I would probably experience a lot of bullying, and I wouldn't be happy with my life. So the only way really was to escape, and my escape was Manchester. I have a sign for Manchester in the LGBT community. We sign Manchester, which I think is hilarious. I have to let you know. Oh yeah, I love that sign. And the reason for it, I asked a gay friend of mine, and said, why do you sign that? And they say, oh, there's so many handsome men and women in the LGBT community in Manchester that it makes you dribble and salivate at how delicious they look. So that's why we sign Manchester. So why did you move to Manchester? Well, that photo was in 2008, and I lived with my best friend in Manchester, and she worked in mental health in a mental health hospital. And that was 2008. That was my first job role as a support worker in a mental health support unit within a hospital. That was my first job, and I loved working with various patients. There were so many challenges that went with it, and at the same time I was supporting patients, I was transitioning myself. So although I was supporting people with mental health, my mental health wasn't fantastic at the time, which, as you can imagine, was a real challenge. And I'm still working now in that general field, working with challenging behaviour, people with learning disabilities, someone who's got a criminal background, and that's something that I've been doing. It's my passion, and that's something that I want to do for a long time.
But that's really useful, and it's very sort of great to have those tips for other people who maybe are struggling with the thoughts that they're having. But yes, I mean, definitely when I went out in Manchester with some of my best friends, I was just thrilled to sort of go out to university and go partying with them all. And there was like a Manchester gay village out there that we used to celebrate in. So when you went back to Middlesbrough, did you feel like really proud that you'd managed to sort of leave, and then when you came back, completely different? Yeah, I mean, when I came back, obviously I came back as a woman, so my parents were sort of very shocked, and they had to sort of deal with that. It's like when you go away on holiday for a long time and come back and people think you've changed, and you know, every time I went back I changed a little bit more and changed a little bit more. Oh, it's like seeing sort of a photo change, isn't it, through the years? Yeah, I mean, my parents would struggle because maybe they haven't seen me for 3 or 4 weeks, and my hair would be getting longer, maybe I'd have my nails done or something. So I think for them it felt really, really fast, but for me it seemed to take forever. It was so slow. And obviously my parents would sort of see me and they'd think, oh, slow down, you're changing really quickly. And I'd sort of say, well, really, I haven't seen you in 6 weeks. You know, it's quite a long time. So obviously one thing that I'm thinking of is, do you remember like when you were going through the transition, what about, you know, the hormones that you have to take through treatment? What's your advice to anybody else going through the change? You know, are there, you know, official hormones that you have to take? Or yeah, I mean, going back at that time, there was lots of people who aren't happy with the waiting time. So for me, from the first referral to the GP to seeing a specialist in London was about 18 months, nearly 2 years. But obviously now with coronavirus, it could be even longer. It could be sort of 3 or 4 years. But I know that a lot of trans people online are buying hormones. Honestly, it can be a bit dangerous because you should be having blood tests first to check your blood levels, making sure that everything's okay and matching the hormones to them. When you're buying them online, I know, you know, I can understand people want them now, they don't want to wait. I completely understand that. Yeah, I think, you know, that makes sense, you know, when people are not wanting to wait and they want to order their hormones online. But with those blood tests, if they're not having them, what could happen? Like, what are the effects that could happen? So really, I just know that some of the risks of taking the hormones treatment without having blood tests, things like heart attacks and blood clots. So if I'm flying abroad for more than 4 hours, I have to wear special socks because the risk of having blood clots is higher. So I think things like that it could be linked to. And so I remember sort of meeting other people that have had hormones and it affects their moods. Maybe they have mood swings up and down and feeling confused. Did that happen to you? Yeah, I mean, when I started taking hormones, I had estrogen, and there's lots of different names of different hormones, but I was on estrogen. And when I first started taking them, I just remember, you know, my breasts were really painful. It felt like golf balls, really. They were really hard. And it's like someone had sort of elbowed you, even if they just tapped you, you know, it felt really, really hard. It felt like they were like bursting out of my chest, really. I mean, yeah, that was very, very painful on those hormones right at the beginning. And obviously a bit later on it started to affect my mood, and I was having awful mood swings. And I think, you know, I snapped my parents quite a few times during that period because